This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Hey, let's go, business storytellers. How's everyone doing? Today, Max Branstetter is back on the show, episode 621. I think he may have been early on. I didn't even look it up, maybe 100s or something like that. So a return guest, but we haven't seen him in a while. So it'll be interesting to see what's new with him. Now, we're going to be talking about how can I make my guests better as a host. I followed all the best practices as far as I can tell when I had Max join us in the green room. I don't know what else he wants, honestly, to be a better guest, but there are plenty of things we can do as guests, so as hosts, to make our guests better. So let's find out what I did right, what I did wrong, and what didn't I do, even though it's hard for me to believe that I wasn't perfect, but we'll find out. Max, hey, welcome back to the show.
Boom. Thank you,
Max,
Christoph. Always
Max
a pleasure.
has some new hardware there. Congratulations. Freshly married a few months ago. Boom.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's I think it's promising because I feel naked without it now. So we've come that far.
Well, keep your clothes on the show.
You can kick me off anytime.
Easy softball right there, my friend. Appreciate it. All right. So, you were running around the podcasting world, right? Talking about what can podcast hosts do better to make their guests better. And it's always interesting to me because certainly some guests are better than others, right? Some make it more conversational. Some have a better topic. Some, have better answers. But what can the host do to actually get a better experience for the guest and, of course, make it a better show?
Yeah, it's a great question and appreciate it, Christoph. It was a true honor speaking at Podcast Movement this year and always a great conference. But what I have been kind of trying to drill home recently is that when you are the host of a podcast or a live streaming show or video podcast, however you want to look at it, you are responsible for providing that energy, providing that charisma, and that flows through, one, to your guest if it's an interview show, and then two, to your listeners or your viewers. So there's several different parts of it. I kind of look at it. I kind of look at it as before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview. And it's important to put in the effort to get the most out of your guest and provide an awesome experience for them throughout. But when it's all said and done, it really comes down to the fact that, hey, you're the cheerleader. You got to bring that energy. You got to bring your personality. You got to bring that charismatic. I just invented a word. And that is what ultimately will brighten up your guest and create an awesome interview, an awesome episode.
Let's kind of take them one by one, before, during, and after. And what's interesting to me is I've been live streaming now for I don't know how many episodes, but hundreds for probably last 2 years, maybe 3 years even, right? The show launched in 2019. And then a year or two later, we started doing the live streams. And you'd be shocked how many people still say, and literally they come on and they say, oh we're going live? Like, we're going live?
I was so close to asking that.
Were you really?
No, not this time. But I think last time I actually did ask that.
Did we go live the last time? I don't remember how long ago it was.
We did that for your Going Live book. So of course.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, that makes sense. But what's interesting is, and when you look at all the communication, right? Even so, when you book a slot on the show, you have to go into my Calendly, right? I don't book it manually because it's just a pain. Everything is in there. And it says in there like a bunch of times, our live stream, we're going live, blah, blah, blah. And then even the follow-up email, just a reminder, we're going live. Like, what else can I do for people to understand that we're going live?
Well, that actually is a super important point, and that's one of the things I hit on, is that your job as a host leading up to the interview is to make sure your guest feels as prepared as possible. So you mentioned Calendly. That's actually one of my favorite tools as well. I mean, I used to be kind of more old school and would schedule everything ad hoc. I think once you use a scheduler like Calendly, you never want to go back because you realize how convenient it is and how easy it is to just put in when you're available. Your guest selects it. You can have automated emails that are tied to it, but of course you want to send them a personalized email as well. But it makes it so frictionless, so smooth in setting up the interview. So that's actually a really important point leading up to the interview. And also, you want to be, as you are, Christoph, overly informative. You want to be overly helpful. You want to let your guests know that, hey, whether it's a live stream or a recorded episode, here's what to expect. Here are some best tips for recording, like having video and audio equipment, having a mic, having a camera, lighting. I know you have about 700 lights set up in your studio, Christoph, so pretty cool there. But one of my somewhere between 600 and 700. Well, I'll let the record show. But one of my favorite tricks, as well as we as hosts do more and more remote interviews, a hardwired Ethernet cable. Rather than just relying on Wi-Fi, if you use a hardwired Ethernet cable, you can get them for super cheap on Amazon. And actually, I was just talking to somebody, shout out Reg Ferguson, who just bought a 100-foot Ethernet cable, and it plugs in directly to the router. What that does is it just makes it a little bit more dependable of a connection. And video live streaming, as you know, takes up a lot of bandwidth. So whatever you can do to be more dependable than just Wi-Fi, which can be spotty at times, can go a long way. But again, it's all about making sure your guest feels as prepared as possible, and any questions, you're there for them to help out, but they should know, even without having to ask any questions, what to expect on your interview or live stream.
I think that's really important. And, even on my Calendly link, there's a thing that says, I would prefer, or I would recommend, or something like that, that you have a microphone and some lights or good lighting or whatever. And I make you check it. I understand. Now, what that exactly means to each person is all over the place, right? Some people I got 6 lights on me. So certainly most people don't do that, but I didn't start there either. I got a professional mic. But typically you can tell the difference when people join and they're just on their computer, and you can just you can totally tell the quality isn't quite there. So I want to let them know. And some people, believe it or not, they actually follow up and they ask, what kind of mic would you recommend? I haven't been on a show before, or I haven't done very many shows and never thought about it. So then you just give them tips. And I don't remember his name now, Brett Tapke. I don't know if that's his last name. He runs PubCon, right? And he actually sends people like a whole thing on when he did virtual conferences. Maybe he still does them, but he's like, this is what I would recommend. And I'm like, how much money do you make on affiliate links because of all these recommendations? He goes, I do, but when people buy them, they're so much happier.
Yeah, it's super important. And I think the more prepared your guest feels, the more potential energy they have to turn into kinetic in the actual interview. So do your job as a host beforehand, leading up to it, making sure they're prepared as possible. And in a part that's kind of hybrid, that kind of leads into the actual interview as well, is making sure that they have an idea what you're talking about. So Christoph, you did an amazing job with me. I know exactly what we're talking about today, which is weird because usually I have no idea. But when you send your guests, send them the topic, and then maybe you want to send them a few bullet points, like a bulleted outline of some key things you want to talk about. But some people take the approach of sending like every single question, and I think that totally ruins the interview. It totally ruins any casual conversation or spontaneity, whatever. See, that's an example of it. However you want to pronounce that, but that's where the magic of interviews happens. So if you're going to send any sort of outline, make it just a brief bulleted outline, but make sure your guest knows what you're talking about at least.
I'm not the expert to ask on how anything is pronounced. Just FYI, there's plenty of words I don't know how to pronounce. So I don't know. Somebody can send us a note after the show. So what I typically do is so I pick my guests very similar to how you came back on the show. I mean, of course, I've known you for a long time and I see your stuff and you post things, but you posted something somewhere and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. That's an interesting topic. Let's see if you can come on the show and talk about it. So I specifically reach out to people based on what I'm seeing them talking about. So I don't typically go to some big name and go, hey, can you come on the show to talk about, who cares? I have a topic in mind. And then based on that topic, I invite people on the show. The biggest challenge I have, and then in a second, let's transition during the show, what you can do. But I sometimes have the problem when I tell guests why I invite them, and then they didn't put that in the little notes, right? Then they didn't put in where it says topic, they just say podcast interview. And I'm like, well, obviously that's what it is. But like they don't put the topic. So when we go on the show 3 months later, I'm like, who are you? Why are
Hopefully more often than not, you do know who they are.
I know who they are, but you know what I mean? Like I talked to them 3 months ago. I'm like, what's the topic? So I catch it sometimes when they book it and I just fix it. But that can be, sometimes it's not a big issue. Okay, let's talk about doing the show though. I mean, certainly you and I have a little bit of, banter going back and forth. It's fun. We're hitting grand slams, while we're talking. What else can hosts do doing the show to make it easier for the guest?
I think that would be my first official grand slam of all time, by the way. I think my first ever home run. I was more of a singles hitter. And if you're lucky, a double or triple. But I think during the show is, of course, like that's a grand slam. That's the Super Bowl. That's what it's all about. That's the actual, the conversation, the episode that your listeners or viewers are going to see. And what's so amazing is, live stream like this, even a live stream can be repurposed into something that's evergreen and people can consume on demand essentially forever. So we're in a really, really cool, fun time in the world of content creating. But you alluded to having fun. And I think having fun, that banter, talking about things that your guest loves to talk about, that's hugely important. The other thing that kind of contrasts with that a little bit that I'm even bigger on is getting your guests out of their comfort zone a little bit. So getting your guest out of their comfort zone. Maybe they can't even pronounce that sentence. But what I mean by that is asking some different questions. So of course, you want to ask questions on the areas that, the area of their expertise, the area that they specialize at. But in addition, you want to ask questions that they've never been asked on any other podcast interview they've ever been on. And that's where you really start to differentiate your show. And your guests will absolutely love you because no one's asked them those questions. Then more often than not, they're sick and tired of answering the same thing over and over again. So this all goes back to your preparation. When you are preparing for that podcast interview and starting to think of what sort of questions you're going to ask, what sort of topics you're going to cover. I mean, my favorite way to do this is to listen to that guest on other podcast episodes. Even in preparation for this, Christoph, I listened to our previous collaborations on my show and on your shows. And it is just the best way to prepare and ground you on, the host personality or the guest personality, as well as what areas they love to talk about, as well as learning some fun facts that, maybe on different shows, another host brought up, but they didn't really dive into that much. But I really want to dive into, Christoph's time playing professional American football in Dusseldorf, or his time on the Iowa Hawkeyes football team. And by the way, those are my favorite throwback photos of all time. But ask questions that get your guest out of their comfort zone a little bit. It's going to create the best content, and your guest is really going to appreciate it.
No doubt. And you know what? Talking about the Hawkeyes, if you look behind me here, I still got my helmet right back there. That is a game-worn, practice-worn helmet. Used to have a mouthpiece in the top 10 years ago, 10 years after the fact. So I fixed that since. The other thing, how do you feel about, so I try to structure my show and really make it like a comprehensive story, right? And so the way I usually do that is, what's the topic? And then I have some, let's call them general questions to figure out, where do you want to go? What might we talk about? But then we also only have 24 minutes, right? So at some point, we can't just talk about one question for 24 minutes. We have to kind of get through all the different things, the little outline I made, all those things. And then the other thing I do, I don't know if you do this, Max, but so now I actually use Otter AI, and you can click that link, the up here, the QR code, or scan it, not click it. But I take this whole thing and I put it into Otter AI. It transcribes it. And when it's transcribed, I will put it into Claude 2 and say, please write me a comprehensive article about this topic based on what Max and Christoph talked about. And then it'll do that. And then I have to edit it because there's all kinds of issues. But my point is that process is way easier if we follow some kind of, I don't want to say script, but like a story, right? So we started with the beginning. We talked about the during. We'll talk about after in a minute, and then any other tips. Is that how? But how do you do that without being too structured, I guess? Or what would you recommend?
I actually love Otter as well. We just use all the same tools. Probably I'm not being paid by those platforms, but hey, my phone's open. No, but I think Otter is an amazing tool. There's so many amazing tools for transcribing, and now obviously with AI and generative AI, who could help me generate that word. There's more potential than ever to turn long form content like this into millions of other pieces of content, seemingly and literally. But I think in terms of episode structure, I like to think of it as simple as possible. So really your areas to kind of differentiate and have more fun and go out there a little bit, quote unquote, out there, I always say are at the start and the end of the interview, because for the meat, that main part of the interview, you're going to talk about whatever the guest's expertise is. And so that's where, you can really see the guests light up and do their thing, talk about whatever they talk about. But book ends at the start and at the end. Make sure at the start you have an icebreaker. Make sure you have something a little bit more casual or about their background. Maybe you talked about some stop they had earlier in their career or their lemonade stand as a kid, and something that transitions into the actual meat, the expertise of what they do. And then at the end, it's always fun to do rapid fire or a big thought-provoking question or this or that, word association, something like that to wrap it up. So that's a good way to think about it. Those bookends you can really differentiate. And then in terms of how structured you want it to be, I really think of this as the same way as a quick bulleted outline that you would email to your guest, in that you shouldn't need to have a bulleted list of more than 5 different topic areas or mini subject areas just on a notepad in front of you that you want to talk about in the actual interview. Just do that so it kind of keeps you grounded. It keeps you anchored as the interview goes on. And then another one of your jobs as a host, and this takes skill, it takes practice, but you can get really, really good at it, is to make a quick judgment call based on, your guest answers and how much time has gone by. All right, do we keep asking more questions in this topic? Do we probe more? Or, all right, let's find a way to transition into another segment, because holy cow, we've only got, 6 minutes left. So it takes a lot of skill and practice, but the simpler, the better. And then making those quick snap judgment calls to make the best possible episode.
Thank you for keeping track of the time for me. I appreciate that. I'm not sure anybody's ever done that before. We indeed do have about 6 minutes left, 5.5, roughly, maybe 6 actually, with the opening. That doesn't count for TV, which is why we have that time period, dbtv.tv. If you want to check them out, that's where the show runs. They still run shows every morning, bright and early. So check them out. Roku, Amazon Fire, and also some TV networks in the United States and maybe globally by now. I'm not sure. So really quick question before we move on to after the show. But during the show, sometimes, so I try to make it easy because, hey, Max, this is easy stuff, right? Like, come on, we're just having a conversation, because people sometimes are worried about that, right? But I've been on podcasts, like there was one show I was on and we come on and he goes, all right, well, this first section, I would like you to do a case study on blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, a case study? And I get it. It's a little bit of like a trigger word for me too, but I'm like, that just sounds like work.
It does. Was that show, did it happen to be an interview at, like a blue chip tech company or a famous consulting group by any chance?
I don't remember who it was. I think it may have been a consulting company. But so what I did, and I don't think I've ever done that before, ever. But I was like, I don't think this is a good fit, honestly. Like, it's probably not. So let's just, thank you for inviting me on and we'll be done. And I don't think I've ever done that before, but I'm like, a case study. Plus, you know how it is. I mean, we can all tell stories, right? But like a case study, that includes like client stuff and projects. I mean, like, how deep do they want me to go? And how deep should I go?
Right. That word case study, just the feel you get from it, for ethos, pathos, whatever that word is, it just brings you down. It's like the term paperwork. It just, yeah. So I'm glad you're still with us today past that interview.
And it did. Oh yeah. We're not slowing down here. All right. So 2 minutes here. Tell me after the show, what shall we do? And here's what I do. In 90 minutes, roughly, you will get an email thanking you for coming on the show. Totally automated, but I mean it, Max. And I do. But it'll tell you where the show is, blah, 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 all these different things. And then, you might reply, and then I might reply with like the clips. By the way, that reminds me, I should show this to you quickly. If you want to do video clips really quickly on Opus Clips, right there, scan that, and you can take a look. Thanks for sharing. I'm not sure what we're referring to here, but maybe that is the link earlier. Absolutely. Sorry, I'm eating into your 2 minutes, 90 seconds. How about after the show, Max?
No problem. And this has been a great case study. No, thanks, Christoph. After is almost as important as the actual interview. So when you think about it, just as you said, of course, you want to nail the thank you. So send an email thank you, whether that's automated or personalized, to your guests, making sure that they know how appreciated you are for being on the show. And then also give them a heads up of when this will actually release, if you're releasing it as a standard podcast episode. And one of my favorite ways to thank you is, it sounds old school, prepare yourself, but the handwritten thank you note. So this is something that, again, my parents taught me this from a very young age, how impactful handwritten thank you notes are. And it's a beautiful thing because as the years go on and the world is taken over by AI, basically, paper and handwritten thank you notes, handwritten notes just are that much more meaningful and that much more impactful. So don't sleep on the handwritten thank you note. So make sure your guest feels appreciated. And then when the actual episode comes out a couple of days before, email them again saying, hey, this is dropping Wednesday morning or whenever it's coming out. I'll share all the info with you then. And then create all those fun marketing assets, the blogs, the transcripts, anything you're using AI like you talked about for, as well as audiograms, video clips if you're doing video. And make sure, you can share them over Google Drive and just with a bulleted list over email where you link back to Google Drive. But make sure your guest has all the tools to share those out. It's going to help spread the word for your show, but it's also going to help the guests get more publicity for themselves as well. And it might even give them some ideas for their own show on how to create marketing assets. And then finally, the last part is just, I coined this term and I'm so sorry, besties with your guesties. Basically, you want to continue the relationship with your guests. Like you and I have, Christoph, you want to be buddies. You want to stay in touch on social media. You want to collaborate when the time's right. You want to help each other out. And sometimes you might just want to hit them up and say, hey, how about that football game? That was pretty crazy this weekend. Or hey, happy birthday. So continue the relationship. It doesn't just stop after the interview. So that's how you get the most out of your guests. And that's what will make your guests love you as a host as well. So there's a lot of things that don't take that much time, but they make all the difference in terms of guest experience and as well as the best experience your guests can share for others as well.
Well, you're one of my bestie with my guestie. I mean, we've been besties for a long time, but that's a good term. And I do remember under your previous brand, Hippo, one thing or another. I mean, you send around the little hippos, and my kids play with them for a long time.
Yeah.
Or like the cups, right, with a hippo on it. It was everybody enjoyed that so much. And check out Going Live. Max does have some chapters in that book, Going Live. Christoph Trapp on Amazon. Search there. You should be able to find it. I can't pull it up in the short amount of time here. Max, really appreciate you coming on. In the last 20 seconds here, tell us, how do people reach out to you? Who should reach out to you? Who are your perfect clients?
Oh, perfect. I appreciate it, Christoph. Well, so there's two main things from my standpoint. One, Wild Business Growth Podcast. If you're interested in hearing interviews with creative entrepreneurs, you can find that at maxpodcasting.com and Wild Business Growth Podcast on all platforms. And maxpodcasting.com is my podcast production business. If you're a business owner who knows that a podcast can be beneficial for you, but knows that it's not in your best interest to do all the behind the scenes work, whether it's video or audio or both, we can help you out. And actually, my contributor buddy for your book, Christoph, Jeff Kozlowski, had butchered his name, but big shout out to Jeff. He's been helping out the business as well, and is a huge help, especially on the video editing side as well. So we got you covered. And maxpodcasting.com/newsletter if you want to sign up for Podcasting to the Max every Thursday. That's my spiel. Out. Boom.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.